Good morning and welcome to this Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Alex Hall, Vice Chairman of this committee and will be your Chairman for this meeting. Can I remind you that the audio and visual feed of this formal public meeting is being recorded and will be accessible via the County Council's website following today's meeting. I would like to begin with a health and safety announcement. There is no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors and leave the building through the reception into the front car park. We then need to wait in the car park until further instructions. Can I remind everyone to ensure their mobiles, laptops and iPads are on silent. If you wish to ask a question during the course of the meeting, you can please raise your hand. Can I also remind members of the committee to switch on their microphones when invited to speak, and to speak close to their microphone and switch their microphone off after making their contributions. I would also like to welcome officers presenting today who are all participating live via Microsoft Teams. Can I ask that you introduce yourselves at the beginning of your item or when you make a contribution? To ask questions or contribute during the meeting, please raise your hand virtually or type speak in the chat function. Requests to speak will be collated by Chiara, and we will now move on to the formal agenda. Do we have any apologies, Robert? No, I think we're...
No apologies, Mr. Chairman.
Everyone's here, so any declarations of interest? No. The minutes... do I have a proposer for the minutes? Okay, thank you. And a seconder. Thank you. We have a busy agenda this morning. I would like to ask officers presenting to only summarise the key points of their reports and what is required by the committee, and in regards to members of this committee, to stress the importance of concise questions and contributions. Are there any announcements from Councillor Richard Davis or Councillor Purton Williams? Are there any announcements from any senior Karen Kassar?
Yes, Chairman. Just really to let the committee know that Paul Little, our Head of Asset Management, will be retiring from the organisation, sorry, losing my voice, on the 31st of January. He's worked with Lincolnshire County Council for 90 years, but overall his service for local government has been plus 40 years. So just really to let people know that Paul will be retiring end of January. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chairman, could I just, it's 19 years, I think, rather than 90.
Did I say 90? I meant to say 9.
I don't think he's quite that old.
Apologies.
Right, so moving on to item 5, rail recovery and strategic role in providing connectivity, supporting Lincolnshire communities and economy. This item on pages 11 to 26 of the agenda pack provides an update on changes to the rail industry, forward strategy and the Department for Transport and Transport for East Midlands Rail Collaborative Agreement. We will receive an introduction of the report by Jane and Rail Policy Officer, and Jason Copper, Transport and Growth Manager, followed by 3 presentations as part of this item. 1, Network Rail Lincolnshire Area Strategic Advice. 2, EMR Lincolnshire Regional Railway Update. And 3, update on the Transport for East Midlands and Department of Transport Rail Collaboration Agreement. The committee is now invited to discuss progress on rail-related issues and consider the recovery and role of rail Lincolnshire going forward. Over to you, and Jane and Jason.
Thank you, Chair. I hope everyone can hear me. If somebody could just acknowledge that they can, that would be helpful. Yeah, I'm going to be I'm not going to say much at all. It's just to introduce that we have 3 speakers here today. We have a speaker from East Midlands Railways, from Network Rail, and also the East Midlands Council collaboration. Each will be covering specific things in some detail. As I hope members are aware, our local transport plan is nearing completion, and we will be bringing that to scrutiny at the next meeting. And as part of that, we've put some significant effort into improving our understanding of rail and what we might be wanting for in the future. But today is very much about listening to what the industry is going through. It's had a very, very difficult last 12 months or 18 months, as many of us have. And I'm really, just to hand over to them, but I'm here as well if members need anything from me. So if I could pass over to the first speaker, please.
Yeah, if anyone wants to make any comments or ask any questions, please do so. Next speaker then, please.
Could I please invite Catherine Grinsdale, Strategic Planner, and Andrew Texton, Senior Strategic Planner, for the first presentation of Network Rail, Lincolnshire Area of Strategic Advice. Thank you.
Thank you, and morning everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. It'll just be me today, as Kathy's not able to make it. Could I just check that slides are being projected into the chamber? Lovely, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Andy Thexton. I'm a senior strategic planner at Network Rail, and our team, we're based in Eastern Region in York, and our job is to discharge Network Rail's licence obligation to undertake long-term planning on behalf of the rail industry. And we've got a study coming up in the Lincolnshire area that's just kicking off now. So I've come to tell you a little bit about that today. Next slide, please. So what is strategic advice? Some of you might know it as Continuous Modular Strategic Planning, or CMSP, that it's been called before. It's now got a much more plain English title. And it's effectively the mechanism through which the rail industry undertakes long-term planning. We look to the long term, so we look up to 30 years into the future, and we use an evidence-based approach, collaborating with our stakeholders to form credible recommendations regarding what the industry should be investing in now, so that we've got a railway fit for the future. We tend to look at localised areas. That's moving away from the old route study methodology that we used to use. And Lincolnshire's an area that hasn't really had any focus since we made that move to more locally based studies. So it's well overdue that we do some work in the area. On the right-hand side, you can see that's a copy of the kind of output that we produce. It's generally a summary report, and we use it to generate proposals for investment to enter the rail network enhancement pipeline, which is essentially the government's pipeline of schemes that it wishes to invest in. Next slide, please. So in terms of this specific study, that's the area that we're going to be looking at. It's essentially the existing rail network in Lincolnshire. And we've also been asked by the government to assess the impact of the Restoring Your Railways proposals for reinstated beach enclosures between Thursby and Louth and at Mablethorpe. So that was a request that Chris Heaton-Harris made in a letter to the proposers of the Thursby to Louth scheme. And we've been asked, although the scheme was rejected in its proposal for funding by the Department for Transport, we've been asked to assess the impact on the existing network and any opportunities for improved connectivity in Lincolnshire. Next slide, please. In terms of what we're aiming to achieve with this study, first and foremost, understand what the current situation is in Lincolnshire in terms of what the railway offers and what it does. We are going to undertake an evidence-based process. We'll be using speed principles, which if you've not heard of, that's the Department for Transport and a Network Rail initiative to do things quicker, essentially half the time and slash the cost. So typically these studies used to take us about a year to do because of the weight of evidence that's required. We're now looking to shave that down to about 6 months. As I mentioned, we're going to try and assess the impact of the proposals for restored beach enclosures in the area, understand any opportunities for improved connectivity across Lincolnshire, and not just areas that are served by the existing network, but also including the Restoring Your Railway proposals. I know this is a big one for local stakeholders. We'll be looking to understand the impact on level crossings of any increased traffic levels through Lincolnshire. And at the end of this, we'll be looking to make evidence-based recommendations to funders, including the Department for Transport and third parties, on what we think, where we think investment should be directed in Lincolnshire. Next slide, please. In terms of our methodology, so we'll be looking at a medium term, which generally means 2030s, and a long term, which it generally means 2050s. We generally, before the coronavirus pandemic, we would do demand forecasting, looking at projecting passenger numbers into the future. In light of the coronavirus pandemic, it's become much more difficult to have robust demand forecasts. So in this, the methodology that we'll use for this is in the medium term, we'll take a more conservative view of demand, and in the long term, we'll use a more ambitious view, and then that should give us two scenarios, optimism, pessimism. And typically we find that recommendations are consistent anyway, but it just gives us a spread of outcomes to reassure funders that that we've accounted for a range of outcomes relating to the pandemic. The first stage of this work will be to review existing evidence. So that'll be existing demand forecasts, evidence that local stakeholders in Lincolnshire can provide to us, evidence that train operators, other industry partners can provide, details of their aspirations. We'll use that to formulate what's called an indicative train service specification. Essentially just means a level of train service that we expect to provide. So one for 2030, one for 2050. In terms of passenger services, that'll be taking account of people's aspirations, how many people we think will be travelling in Lincolnshire. And in terms of freight, we'll be using recognised industry freight forecasts to project the traffic numbers of freight trains. Then we'll do some capacity analysis, which is essentially overlaying that train service onto the existing network, seeing whether it fits. Typically, when we're projecting things forward, it doesn't, and it shows a case for investment. We'll do some other analysis, which sounds a little bit secretive, but it's things like looking at level crossings, looking at stations, pedestrian flow, that kind of thing. For Lincolnshire, that'll probably just involve Lincoln Station itself. And if appropriate, we'll develop infrastructure interventions to tackle any issues that we find. We always say if appropriate because we don't assume that they will be required, but it's almost certain that they will. Next slide, please. And in terms of the activities that we'll do, as well as the train service specifications, we'll do some economic analysis. That'll probably involve generalised journey time. So it's effectively a measure of connectivity across Lincolnshire, looking at how easy it is for people to travel now and how long it takes, and then comparing that to how we could improve that in the future. Again, checking the capacity of the network, checking the pedestrian flow at Lincoln, checking that level crossings do not become an issue in terms of risk. That could be simply too many trains having the barriers down for too long, encouraging user behaviour, not in accordance with the crossing, that kind of thing. And if appropriate, develop interventions and put an order of magnitude cost to it. So that order of magnitude would be low, medium, high on a set scale, and report that to the funder. Next slide, please. So in terms of where we're at with it, we're in our early stages with this study. We are identifying a question lead at the moment to take this forward in the new year. The work is a priority for us. We've got funding to do it. We are aiming to get stakeholders together in the new year to start discussions. In the meantime, our analysts are working away in the background, laying the foundations for us to start. And following the start, which should be in January, it'll take about 5 months to complete. So we're looking at having an output for this around summer 2022. And the output will be a summary report that details what's required in Lincolnshire for the rail network over the next 30 years. And that's it. That's a whistle-stop tour of what we're planning to do. So if anyone's got any questions, please do ask.
Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Andy, if I can, two areas, please. One with regards to infrastructure and your analysis and whether you need new infrastructure, then whilst we're seeing yet more proposals for the coastal area, then my residents in my area very much would like to see the possibility of a new platform. We won't get a station, but a platform at Washingborough. There are over 5,000 houses scheduled to appear at the top of Cannock Hill. At the moment, if anybody wants to access the rail network, then they've got to drive into the city, which is traffic congestion, is not sustainable transport because it's bringing carbon into the city, taking up car parking, which should be for people arriving into the city, not dispersing. So it's not just about getting from Washingborough area into Lincoln, it's about going south on the network as well. So I'd like to see if there's anything that can be developed that way. I know our MP is very keen to see that as well. And with regards to analysis, then I'd like to know what happens with previous analysis. In Sleaford years ago, or a few years ago, when it would appear that privately a bridge could be built over the railway through planning gain, then it was on Network Rail's high priority list to close the crossing in Sleaford. And since then, we've had more and more heavy goods traffic coming through, which causes congestion there, and we're trying to traffic manage Sleaford going forward. So I'm struggling that if the analysis showed that that was in the top 60 crossings that should be closed when money was available to build a bridge, and that money's not now there, how has it managed to slide down the priority list and not appear to be something that's on Network Rail's agenda?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Councillor. I'll answer the level crossing one first. So the level crossing risk on a day-to-day basis, I can't give you a specific answer on that because that's looked after by our level crossing team who will assess day-to-day risks. So in our team, we're doing the long-term element of that. So what we'll do as part of this methodology is look at all the crossings in Lincolnshire. We will look at what the barrier downtimes are now, and we'll look at the crossing risk score now, and we'll project forward what we think that will move to in the medium and long term. And if appropriate, make recommendations. So that could be enhanced mitigations at the crossing, or it could be closure of the crossing. To give you an example, we're doing a study in Peterborough at the moment. We've found some crossings that have downtimes of up to 50 minutes in the hour. So we will be recommending closure of those crossings. But as far as this specific crossing goes, until we do the work, I can't give you an answer about that. The other part of your question, in terms of parts of Lincolnshire that may not be well connected, we will look at that. So we're going to do an activity called generalised journey times from population centres that aren't properly connected to the network at the moment, and how they can be improved. And that may be through rail, or it may be through bus, or other transport modes. So if you could let me know the full details of what you'd like us to look at, we can include that in the scope.
Thank you.
Councillor Austin. Oh, I thought you put your hand up earlier. I do apologise. Councillor Diavan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was probably by accident, but I think that presentation was very Lincoln-centric, and there were lots of Lincoln comments. But I hope you're not going to forget about the rest of Lincolnshire, because it's a big old place. And actually, I agree with what Councillor Wright was just saying about hubs, and that was one of the points I did want to make. So Councillor Wright used the point of Washingborough, a potential hub there. What value do you see there being in other hub rail stations? And by that I mean where there's a good sized car park that's lit, where people can just pull up and get onto a train. I represent Waddington and Highcombe East, and we've got North Highcombe train station. It's not in my division, but it's in North Highcombe. And that's sort of a hub. There's a reasonably good-sized car park there, but it's not on the scale of Swinderby, for instance. So in this review, are you looking at how this can join up to the highway network so that motorists can quite easily park and then get onto the train service. But the issue that I have with being a Greater Lincoln councillor, it's actually the connectivity that we have in Lincoln to Nottingham. So what work specifically do you see being done there to improve those services? I suppose it's that east-west connectivity that we'd like to see across the country, isn't it? So I'm just curious with that. And I, just as an example, Mr. Chairman, if I may, when I was looking at the agenda, I did do a little bit of analysis on if I was to go to Nottingham. So the train time from North Highcombe takes about 44 minutes. And I'd say on a bad day, it'd probably take me 15 minutes to drive to the train station in North Highcombe from my house. And there's only a limited number of spaces. So I gamble that I'm going to get a space, Mr. Chairman. And the cost for 2 adults, open return, is about £25. So really, in the grand scheme of things, if I was to get the train to Nottingham now, it would cost me more than it would in petrol, diesel, and it would take longer. So what are you going to do to actually make it easier, cheaper, and better to travel by train? Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Councillor. So what we will do is we will undertake a review of the levels of connectivity that are provided today, and we will look at the opportunities to improve that going forward. So obviously going west to Nottingham is key. One of the major limiting factors from the Lincolnshire area towards Nottingham is, of course, there's a flat crossing at Newark where the line crosses the East Coast Main Line, the northern end of Lincolnshire, and there is a limited number of paths across there. So that's not specifically within our scope of works at the moment because it's on the East Coast Main Line and we're trying to focus specifically on Lincolnshire. But it is something that we discuss with the DFT in terms of there's a highway scheme in the area at the moment, and we're trying to take some provision now to build into that scheme the potential for a grade separated junction at Newark. We'll look at opportunities to improve. In terms of the prices and the cost of travel, that's not something that's within the scope of our study, but I do recognise that it is an issue for passengers. It's an issue for the industry, but it's not something that's currently in the scope. What we're specifically focusing on here is looking at providing a network that's capable of taking the number of passengers at the level of connectivity that's required for Lincolnshire into the future. Sorry, and just picking up on your question about multimodal travel as well. Yes, we will assess multimodal travel, so we will assess integration with bus, active modes, and highways. That will be part of the study.
Thank you, Councillor Ashton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your indulgence, appreciating I'm not a substantive member of this committee, apart from having an interest in all things generally rail. It has all felt to me that Lincolnshire is pretty well connected east-west, certainly for commuters and tourists. Certainly in the eastern half of Lincolnshire, it's relatively straightforward to get on train at Skegness or Boston and arrive in Nottingham or Grantham or so on. But actually getting south to places like Peterborough is altogether more challenging. I was just wondering whether there are opportunities in this process to look at those north and south links. I note from our papers that the joint line between Peterborough, Spalding, Sleaford, Lincoln and Doncaster doesn't operate, or sorry, the bit between Lincoln and Spalding Peterborough doesn't operate on a Sunday, which is still incredibly limiting on the potential of that line. When, as I say, if you live in Peterborough, it's quite a challenge to get on a train and go to the coast, whichever coast you wish to go to. Norfolk is quite a challenge from Peterborough. Actually, there are very good opportunities if there's the possibility of looking at direct connection between Peterborough and Skegness. I'm pleased to see on that map the rebuilding your railway suggestion. I think it's perhaps the only opportunity I shall ever have to see that on a map, but it's genuinely good to see nonetheless, and I'm pleased that it's being factored in, because it's not just about looking at that whole potential route, but if I'm right in thinking from this presentation, we may be able to factor in bits of it, improvement that run on from it, rather than the whole scheme. But coming back to these north-south connections and taking in points around Waddington and Bracebridge and so on, there is also a fantastic opportunity if, as a result of this, the first LNER train from Lincoln in a morning to London and the last one coming back at night, if consideration could be given to running that via the joint line, via Sleaford and Spalding, simply the population of Spalding, Sleaford, Ruskington, Metheringham and any other hub or station that you could add into that would give a population of about 57,000, effectively new customers for that direct service down to London and back, and it would give a degree of connectivity across the Lincolnshire area that we simply don't currently have. And my final point would be around stations or halts, or we currently have a number of stations around Lincolnshire which serve practically nothing, and it's an absolute wonder that they're still open, and you genuinely have to question. I'm thinking Haven House, I'm thinking Thorpe Culvert, I'm thinking Hubbard Bridge, Swineshead Bridge. They're no longer request stop. They both have two trains in either direction each day, and I've been at Thorpe Culvert when both trains have come into the station, stopped, opened their doors, no one got on, no one got off, doors closed and off they go again. And I'm aware that, and I'd be interested to know whether this has changed with the sort of post-COVID and the changes in how we're going to provide rail, that East Midlands Railway were looking at, as part of their franchise agreement, to upgrade even those stations with automatic ticketing and Wi-Fi. And frankly, there is no one there to use them, and there isn't going to be. So are there any plans, is there any opportunity to revert some of those stations which are now effectively served by two trains a day to request stops, so that people might be able to use them? I'm thinking Thorpe Culvert is the nearest station to the Wolds for walking and cycling. Alternatively, can we look at perhaps closing some of those stations and opening new ones where housing has come along in the last 20 or 30 years to make them a much more viable place for a train to stop than is currently being achieved? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. We will look. So as I said during the presentation, this process involves local stakeholders and industry partners, including train operators. So train operators are a key part of. So going back to your first point about north-south connectivity and routing the LNER service via Sleaford and Spalding, that's something that we'd have to look at jointly with LNER. We'd have to look at it, and then if that's what we wanted to propose, they'd need to be in agreement with that as well. So we can certainly make a note of that and have a look at whether there's any merit in diverting any of those services that way. In terms of stations that are rarely used, this is the kind of local detail that perhaps we're not as close to. So that's where we really rely on the stakeholders that are part of our working groups to bring that evidence to us. So if Jason, who's on the call today, is a member of that working group, along with others in Lincolnshire, if we can get that level of detail brought to the working groups, we can certainly investigate any specifics. So please submit things to us, and please tell us what you want us to look at, and then we'll undertake that exercise.
Yeah. Okay, Jason, if you'd like to come in, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of points there. Yep, certainly, as Andrew's highlighted there, I'll be taking a seat on that steering group, and if members have got any specific points please send them through to me by email, or you can ring me, whatever's more convenient. It would be very useful to get some of that very local knowledge, and I can make sure that that's fed through. The other point I was just going to make in relation to what Councillor Dyer has raised, we're doing our own work in terms of a local transport plan around the identification of hub stations and what improvements may be needed. We wanted to get ahead of that so we can start to feed that directly into Network Rail as part of this work. And as I said at the beginning, we'll be bringing the local transport plan to the next scrutiny panel in the new year. So you'll be able to have a look at that in some detail. But it was just to give members some assurance that we are looking at this, and we'll be working very closely with Network Rail moving forwards.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question was, could we have these proposals to us once they're completed, and if timing allows, preferably before they're published? Thank you.
Yeah, so Jason's on the working group, so he will get a copy of our report. As part of that, he'll get a copy of the draft report to comment on before we finalise it. Just a point of clarity on publishing. In terms of, I'm sorry if you meant publishing or finalising, but once it's finalised, we will then take a decision on whether to publish it publicly. Our policy generally is to publish things publicly because we think it's the right thing to do. We generally put these reports on our website, and you're welcome to go and have a look on our website in our long-term planning area if you'd like to see the kind of reports that we do produce. So we are likely to publish it, but sometimes the sensitivities around housing or land or whatever it might be that stops us from publishing. But our intention will be to publish it, but certainly there'll be a process in place for Jason to provide some scrutiny to our report, and he's welcome to take that report and take advice from whoever he needs to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. The report is welcome because Lincolnshire Railway seems to be the poor cousin when you go around the country and look at other railways and how they operate. What I'd like to know is how much funding will be available, and will this turn out just be a tabletop exercise? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. In terms of how much funding is available, I can't answer that because I don't have any control over what funding's available, and we've not been given any figures of what's available. What I can tell you is what we typically do with this strategic advice in terms of attracting funding. So when we do a study like this, we're quite a small team with a lot of network to cover. We don't do these studies unless we think that A, there's a reasonable requirement for some funding, and B, there's a reasonable chance of getting some funding. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is that we then would prioritise things that are more near term, and then we'd set things aside maybe that are more long term, and we would then make a submission to what's called the Rail Network Enhancement Pipeline, which is it's a series of stage gates, and it's the way that railway investments are delivered. So essentially, you start by asking for a small amount of development funding. So we've identified a problem, and we'll then ask for maybe £100,000–200,000 to go away and do a strategic outline business case, which is the first point in the cycle. And then it continues. And then once we've got that funding, it's then in the rail network enhancement pipeline, and it goes through that pipeline, hopefully all the way to delivery. But in terms of how much funding's available, it's very difficult to say. The Department for Transport will be part of this working group, so they'll be involved and they'll be seeing the recommendations that we're making, involved in making these decisions and involved in approving the report. So that sort of lays the ground for a request for funding. But until such time as we actually make the request, I couldn't say how much funding there would be available. But we certainly do not intend it to be a tabletop exercise. We're undertaking this study because we believe there's a reasonable requirement for investment and a reasonable chance of taking things forward.
Thank you. Can I remind members just to be brief with their questions? We are limited with time, so please be as brief as possible. Councillor Gibson, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the Speaker for coming here and answering questions. Can I ask, as part of the review, will you be speaking to any local groups that you're made aware of? I know that in Spalding we've got a transport forum and a transport train services group. They're keen to look at increasing rail into our part of Lincolnshire and looking at opening other stations like Donington. I know it's higher on their agenda. So yeah, can I ask if you'd be speaking to those groups, and are you aware of the Donington station request?
Thanks, Councillor. No, I'm not aware of that request. But when we get a study lead in place, that's the kind of detail that we'll expect the study lead to be across. In terms of the local groups, I'm not sure that particular group are on our stakeholder list at the moment. But if you'd like to either send the details to me or Jason, we'll pick that up separately and involve them. The more evidence that we can have submitted to inform a good, credible, evidence-based study, the better.
Thank you, Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm concerned that people in the Boston and Skegness area cannot get to Lincoln by train without a very, very long wait in Sleaford, which means if you are going as a student to study, or if you are somebody who works and starts work at a normal, reasonable time of day, then you are faced with either getting late to where you want to get to, or just having to wait probably for the best part of 2 hours in Sleaford. It would be wishful thinking that we could ever reinstate a direct line, but is there some way that there can be a more seamless connection, please, between the one and only line through Boston and the line that goes from Spalding up to Lincoln, please? Thank you. That would keep cars off the road.
Thank you, Councillor. Specifically, we will look at improved connectivity across Lincolnshire and major towns, Boston to Lincoln. We will look at that, and we'll do that in conjunction with the local transport plan and existing information that we've got from Jason. I can't comment specifically on that particular link, but improving connectivity across Lincolnshire is one of the key aims of this study, or making recommendations to improve connectivity.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm pleased to see this study's being carried out on rail services in Lincolnshire as well. Very pleased. I'm just nervous about a comment that Councillor Ashton made about downgrading the places such as Swineshead Bridge from scheduled stops to request stops. Places like Swineshead are growing at an incredible rate, lots of new housing, and the local people there want to see the services at Swineshead Bridge improved, not downgraded. So I do worry about that. And again, like Councillor Gibson was saying, the input from local groups is really important, I feel. And similar to Spalding, we've got a Boston Transport Strategy Board made up of members from the County Council, the Borough Council and strategic partners. And I'd be keen that they have an input to this study, please. So there's a raft of things there, but I think the local input to these things is very important. And as Councillor Austin said, the connectivity for Boston and Skegness to Lincoln does seriously need looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, as stated earlier, we're very happy to hear from local groups. It's local groups that are closest to the detail in areas like Lincolnshire. Things that we might be aware of various things, but almost certainly there's things that we're not aware of that people can flag and raise, and we can look into. So, yeah, please get in touch with myself or Jason, and we'll make sure that people's views and concerns are heard, and we'll take account take account of the main themes.
Councillor Dyer.
Chairman, just a very, very quick point. Based on the comments that have been made and the positive answers being received, i.e. they're happy to receive contact details from local interest groups, would it be worth the Highways Committee emailing round all members to see if any members have got organisations that they'd like to put in contact in respect to this study? Because I think that might be handy. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that, Councillor Dyer. Councillor Ashton, brief comment.
Very brief for the benefit of Councillor Brooks, just to reassure him that my suggestion for a request drop would actually be an improvement on those stations where there are currently only 4 trains calling per day. It would be to allow the other trains that don't call to do so when required.
Okay, thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion for this item. Oh, right, are we? Oh, right, okay, I do apologise. Yes, please. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may introduce the second presentation, EMR Lincolnshire Regional Railway Update by Craig Leaper, Senior Commercial Strategy Manager, and Laura Etheridge, Stakeholder Manager. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Just double checking once more, have we got slides that you're going to project to the council chamber, please? I think we have.
Two seconds, thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much. Okay, do you want to take us on to the first slide? So just wanted to do a very quick outline of what I'm intending to cover with this slot this morning. So firstly, a quick impact update in terms of COVID and I guess building on the theme earlier of the impact that has had on our railway and our revenue numbers in particular in terms of recovering. Industrial relations, I'll cover May 2021 timetable and subsequently the December timetable, which began yesterday. Industrial relations is on there twice. I don't think we need to do it twice. Future service plans and Skegness summer 2022. So that is the list of things that I'm intending to cover in this slot. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a very brief overview then of how we're doing in terms of the recovery from the pandemic. So I think members will be aware that COVID has had a massive impact in terms of the number of people travelling by train, particularly during the lockdown, where of course we were encouraging people to avoid public transport for very good reason. But that has had an impact, and we're now starting to see a recovery of sorts, albeit still a long way to go, as you'll see there. What we're seeing typically is that the leisure market has recovered quicker than the commuter market, and I'm sure that will be common across many modes of transport as people have adapted to working from home and perhaps other ways of doing their duties, minimising travel for work purposes. But leisure has come back strongly, and in fact, the numbers that you see there are around overall loadings, but if you were to take leisure in isolation, I know that we've had some weekends in recent weeks where actually the numbers have been comparable to and in fact even exceeded 2019 levels in recent weeks of travel. So that is encouraging, but of course leaves a very big hole in terms of where some of the patronage would typically have been in the past. Next slide, please. And then this is a sort of operator by operator table that the Office of Rail and Road has produced, and what this does is it shows across the industry how we compare in terms of demand coming back to our railway versus other operators. As you can see there, we're in the top half of the table, but of course there aren't big numbers in that table in terms of the percentage recovery still, and I think that again probably points to the size of the challenge we've got to regrow the markets that we traditionally had, and indeed to fill the hole in terms of the cost coverage in the industry, which is an increasingly recurring theme, as I'm sure members will be aware. Next slide, please. So just on to industrial relations. So unfortunately, we're in a situation where we have an ongoing dispute with the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union. And over the weekend, not last weekend, but the one before, we had industrial action that was scheduled by RMT to coincide, unfortunately, with the Lincoln Christmas market, which had a very severe impact on the number of trains that we were able to operate to and from that event. And indeed, we had a difficult decision to make around allocating capacity and where we could resource it. And we had to make some quite significant sacrifices across the whole network that we operate in order to try and focus as much capacity as we could do to Lincoln and the surrounding area to deal with the increased demand that we would typically see for the Christmas market. We did contact Lincoln City and Lincolnshire County Councils to make them aware of the situation and to encourage customers to consider alternative arrangements. What happened in the end was that with less than 12 hours notice, the RMT decided to call off the strike action, and unfortunately at that point we were not able to restore the full train service that we would have liked to have operated for the event. It was too late for us to do so. But in the end, we did transport around 20,000 people through Lincoln for the market, and we had volunteers from across our business and contingency roles to keep customers moving as best we could do. We did have a significant challenge with rail replacement transport that weekend, and actually that is a further recurring theme that we're seeing with sourcing of rail replacement bus vehicles. What we're finding is that the industry is that the bus industry is changing immeasurably around us, and actually not only are there costs that are causing suppliers to run into difficulty, but also we're finding that bus drivers are increasingly defecting to other industries, perhaps the HGV industry, to provide resources there, and indeed it's become a very big struggle for rail replacement suppliers to backfill. Next slide, please. So appreciate I'm jumping about. I'm just trying to make sure that we cover a number of topics here in this, and of course there'll be the opportunity for questions at the end. May 2021 timetable. So members may be aware that on the 16th of May we attempted to run a very different train service across our network to the one that we were doing during the COVID pandemic, and indeed compared to pre-COVID. What happened in reality when we did operate that train service was we saw it didn't perform as well as we'd have expected. In fact, it performed very poorly, and we're very sorry for what has happened there. It's not what we wanted, and for sure we're now into trying to recover that position with a number of initiatives that we've been taking since June of last year when we introduced a reduced timetable. And I guess there are 5 themes that we're focusing on when trying to recover that position to get back to a place where we can deliver that timetable reliably. First is our fleet, our rolling stock. The second, our customer service operations. The third, our performance more generally, and looking at the building blocks of our timetable to make sure we've got that correct. And then Nottingham operations, which we saw was a real pinch point in the early weeks of the timetable. And then finally, resilience around having the right numbers of train crew with the right competencies that we have to be able to run the train service, which we found increasingly difficult. I think what we reflect is that actually the May 2021 timetable was a very big step for EMR, a very big step which it probably bit off more than it can chew. Is probably an honest reflection. Many other operators were still not attempting to run 100% of train service, but we'd gone to, of course, a level of train service that was above that with what we were attempting to do. We were very ambitious. We felt we could do it. And indeed, what's happened in reality is that didn't transpire, and we've found a number of issues that we've needed to tackle. And of course, what we're now doing is building a slow and steady recovery to be able to go and deliver that service robustly and reliably, rather than having ad hoc cancellations like we saw in the early weeks of that timetable. I think it's fair to say that improvement plan has made good progress, and indeed this weekend just gone, we did reintroduce a small number of train services across the network, but there's still a long way to go, and there are still dedicated teams that are looking at fixing those underlying issues with the timetable. Our ambition is to one day get back to running that timetable in full, but we've still got quite a way to go on that recovery trajectory. Next slide, please. So this is just a summary of the change that's happened over the weekend just gone. So there are a number of trains that we have reinstated in the timetable. I think it's fair to say we've had to take a balanced view over what we run in this timetable, and where previously in the previous timetable, given the demand on the Skegness route in the summer, we had run and sought to protect a full service on the Skegness route. We've made a difficult decision to trade off in order to meet other demand and competing crowding requirements across the whole network that we operate. And that has meant that for the period of the December to May timetable, there are 4 services which are temporarily withdrawn on the Skegness routes. They will be reinstated next May, and we will reallocate resource in order to bring those services back in. That is a firm commitment from us. But I think it's fair to say that on an ad hoc weekend by weekend basis, we'll also be looking at whether or not those trains are required in the timetable on a particular weekend in order to deliver Easter, for example, strengthening, or Christmas holiday strengthening. Next slide, please. Just onto the Barton line, so another part of the Lincolnshire network where we have made a change in December. Members may be aware, but EMR took this service on from Northern, must have been about a year ago now. Initially it was a Northern service, but it was delivered with Northern rolling stock and Transpennine train crew. So a bit of a bugger's muddle, for want of a better phrase. What we've been seeking to do is gradually bring that operation fully in-house within EMR so that we can deliver it more reliably and not rely on third parties who perhaps haven't got that sort of coordinated eye on it. And what we have done is we've brought from this weekend just gone Class 156s onto the route, and we have now put Class 153s, which were the non-compliant rolling stock type, out of the operation, which means that we've now had a step change in both the quality of the rolling stock and the ability to run the service reliably, which we hope will pay dividends in a more reliable service and a more accessible service for everyone. As I mentioned earlier, the plan is to gradually get to a position where we have full coverage on the route with EMR drivers to supplement the EMR senior conductors, which took on the operation over the weekend. Next slide, please. Okay. Future timetable plans. So a question was asked, I think, in the lead up to this presentation around TSR2, as we've been terming it, which is the next stage of our enhancement agenda that the franchise was planning. At the moment, and I guess this links back to the earlier comments that were made, we're not 100% sure on the timing of when TSR2 will happen. Sorry, just give me one moment. Apologies, that's the perils of working from home. Future timetable plans on the GNGE Doncaster-Peterborough route. I think it's fair to say that it still remains our ambition to do everything that the franchise had anticipated. It's a question of when. What we've seen around us are some of the external factors have had an influence, and what we've previously thought was the roadmap to delivering that change is no longer that same roadmap. I think the franchise was let on the basis of the Liverpool-Norwich routes that we operate splitting into 2, and what that would have meant for was Nottingham to Liverpool portion of the route would transfer away to another operator, and the resources that do currently operate that route would be redeployed in order to deliver a service enhancement in the east. Now that is no longer the case. The Department for Transport has asked that we keep the Liverpool to Norwich route in its totality for the time being and do not pursue a split of that route. So instead now, in order to deliver an enhanced service in the east, we would now need to increase our resources in terms of rolling stock and train crew. And only at that given point in time can we look at which enhancements we can pursue. I think it's fair to say we're now working with the department to work out in which order some of those enhancements would be delivered rather than a big bang per se. So that is where we're at in terms of future plans. And I think, broadly speaking, the Doncaster-Peterborough via Lincoln enhancement falls into that category. Next slide, please. So just jumping to Skegness for summer 2022. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be reintroducing the 4 services that have been temporarily withdrawn in the winter timetable, and we'll be running, wherever possible, 4 carriage trains on that route, which is what we did in the summers, this summer just gone and previous summer. And in terms of the high summer, we're looking to supplement that with intercity rolling stock as we've done in previous years. And we've got quite significant plans there in terms of crowd management and queuing systems, etc., which we would have done in previous years also, but we'll work closely with Jason and Jane on our plans. I think that may be my last slide, so thank you for listening. Apologies for the interruption from the work from home perils, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Councillor White.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Craig, for that presentation, but there are certain words within there that I have different interpretations of, I'm afraid. From somebody that thought it would be a good idea to use the train last week to come to Lincoln, then there's such words such as anticipated and roadmap, which in my word actually equate to promises that were made. When communities were asked to accept more heavy goods stock rolling through, that was on the back of the fact there was promises made that they were going to make some improvements to passenger services. So to get on old rolling stock, as we like to refer to it, where some of the seats I can't even get into properly because I can't get my knees between the seats when we were promised brand new Abelia trains, then that's not an enhancement. That's a badly needed improvement that we were promised and has not appeared. And yes, we're talking about COVID, but unfortunately that seems to be a cover-all now for everything that's delayed, is that we just say we'll just have to wait. So some of these anticipations, some of these roadmaps, some of these shortages, some of these enhancements, they're not. They're basically, that was to actually bring it up to the 21st century standard, not to enhance it. It was to actually to improve it to a standard that we would expect paying customers to actually sit on a train and actually just be transported, not in luxury, but in a standard that they expect. So, you know, some of this now is sort of wearing a bit thin on customers that are not seeing it. And a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, I attended East Midlands Councils, which I know we've got a presentation coming up, but I heard it said there that somebody said that those who shout loudest get the most, and that some of the rolling stock that should have been promised for this area actually disappeared up to northern trains. So is it the fact that we're not shouting loud enough in this area, and these anticipated enhancements, should we really be seeing them as those, or something that actually is a badly needed upgrade to what's actually we should not be using now and not expecting people to have to accept as a standard of transportation?
Thank you, Councillor. I suppose I understand what you're referring to, and I certainly understand the frustration in terms of the delayed, as you say, enhancement to deliver what people would consider to be a basic level of train service and comfort in the 21st century, and not running around old carriages as we have been doing. I think what's within our control at EMR and what's within the control of the Department for Transport are probably two slightly different things here. But what I would say is that where we've had vehicles that we have had made available to us, which we have got a small quantity of cascaded trains that have come in from other operators, we are using them as best we can do to deploy that enhanced level of service, and it still remains firmly our ambition to get to a point where we do deliver that step change in quality to the level of quality that people expect. It is a question of when can we deliver that, and in the context of a wider industry where there's a rolling stock shortage, particularly diesel rolling stock shortage at the moment, when we can deliver each of those individual enhancements. But I think it's fair to say we at EMR have been fighting the corner to try and get to that level of service, but we are in amongst a number of other operators who face a similar situation to ourselves.
Thank you, Councillor Ashton.
Thank you very much. I'd be interested to know what the impact is on efficiency and running costs of going from 153 to 156 units. I hear the point that the 153s are not access compatible, but it's the same, and I'd actually extend this point. I'm aware that EMR has ceased using 153s as individual units for some time. The difficulty, of course, is running two carriages on some of these services, which certainly in winter time are not going to be very heavily used, is that you end up with two 11-litre diesel engines revving their guts out instead of one. My other points I'll just run through as quickly as I can. I'm still incredibly disappointed that, as I mentioned in my questions on the earlier presentation, is that there is no service on the joint line between Lincoln and Peterborough on a Sunday, which leaves Spalding, a town of 29,000 people, without a passenger service on a Sunday, when realistically it's a half-an-hour journey to Peterborough. That seems to be a huge missed opportunity on that line, and a huge missed opportunity for that town. I'd be very interested to know whether this is something that will for certain be addressed once now that the Warrington Junction improvements are effectively completed. I'd be interested to know what the root cause of the industrial action that caused the disruption for the Lincoln Christmas market, what that really comes down to. Appreciating the difficulty the rail industry very clearly is in from the passenger numbers on your presentation there. And I condemn that industrial action as a kick in the guts to passengers and an industry which is already very clearly struggling at a time when actually everyone within that industry should be pulling together to make these services work and to make sure that passengers come back. Also interested in the Skegness timetable for 2022. Perfectly happy with the suggestion of a reduced service during the winter time. Again, it doesn't make economic sense to have trains revving away if there's genuinely no one to use them. But looking at 2022, is there any opportunity around those intercity stock to look at additional services for that summer timetable coming in from Peterborough, or if we can only dream, London King's Cross? I mean, quite simply, I'm certain that there is a ready market for tourists in Peterborough who would like to be able to use public transport, get on a train, go to the seaside and come back again. And with the improvement that we've at Warrington, this is something that becomes a much more viable possibility than it was previously. And my final comment would be on rolling stock. I think it puts it into sharp focus when we are so delighted. I'm thrilled that we've got Class 170 rolling stock, which coming into Lincolnshire now, which feels so new, so wonderful. So it's like a step into the modern age. Trouble is, I remember them when they were first here 20 years ago, and I've been longing for them to come back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll try and address each of those points in turn. So the first one was around use of Class 153s on an ongoing basis. Unfortunately, we're in a position where, because of the accessibility constraints of those trains, and also the fact that they flush effluent onto the track in this modern age, which is not acceptable. Those are trains that we cannot make use of anymore, and we do not have permission to use them anymore. So there isn't, unfortunately, an option for us to be able to continue running them. I do recognise the points around the economic, the economics of using one carriage trains over two, where demand justifies only one carriage. But unfortunately, in reality, we don't have a compliant stock type that we can use that is one carriage, unfortunately. On the point around Spalding on Sundays, I guess I skirted over that a little bit in the discussion around the Peterborough to Doncaster enhancement. I suppose the only slight difference on that particular service group is that it wasn't something which the department contracted with East Midlands Railway, and so we're back into a discussion around making a business case for that. That said, I do recognise the comments around the sizes of the towns on that corridor, and also the infrastructure upgrades that have happened in recent years and indeed weeks in the case of Warrington. That does give us an opportunity to relook at that, I think, and I'd be very happy for us to follow up offline around making the case for that enhancement, perhaps as a priority, as a new emerging priority in the context of the new world post-COVID. It could well be that we relook at the package of enhancements that we deliver and consider a different prioritised list. So I'd be very happy to work on that. The third point that you mentioned, Councillor, was industrial action and the root cause of that industrial action. I probably could be here all day to talk about that. There's an awful lot of things that have been brought to us by the RMT, and they date back to pay and contract matters as well as methods of operation. And some of those things have been building up over quite some time, have been perhaps grumbles but not disputes in the past. And what's happened is actually we've got to a point where all of those things have been bundled together into a dispute, and that has resulted in strike action. We've been experiencing strike action across the year at EMR, and I think it's fair to say up until recently that impact had been confined to Sundays, and we'd had 19, I think, consecutive Sundays of industrial action from RMT members. What's happened though in recent weeks is that has changed to becoming a more disruptive strategy from the RMT and targeting special events, and I can't at this moment in time guarantee that we won't be without further disruption. We continue to try and resolve the disputes, and we've put a further offer to the RMT to go and resolve those disputes items, but we still haven't yet had confirmation from them that has met what they are looking for. If I then go further on to the point around passenger volumes on summer Skegness services, I think it's fair to say that the capacity that we're going to be putting in next summer is to simply use everything that we have available and throw everything that we have available at Skegness for next summer, and we don't have any marginal capacity over and above that to go and deliver new services and new market opportunities. That said, we can have a conversation with our colleagues in the industry at LNER to see if there are any opportunities to do, as you've described, a new service possibility between London and Skegness via Peterborough. If that were something that people would like us to pursue, we can certainly look at that and at least understand whether or not their situation is the same as ours, which is that actually we just don't have the resources available to be able to go and deliver those services. I think that broadly covers everything. I hope I've covered everything there.
Thank you very much. We're just now going to move on to our last presentation for the day. It's the update on the Transport for East Midlands and Department for Transport Rail Collaboration Agreement, and it will be presented by Kyle Butterworth, Head of Rail Improvement for East Midlands Councils. Over to you, Kyle. Thank you.
Good morning. Hi. Can we have the slides up, please? Thank you. Okay, hello. Yep, my name's Kyle. I'm an officer at East Midlands Councils, and today I've been asked to come and explain a bit more about the East Midlands Rail Collaboration Agreement between Transport for the East Midlands and the DFT, and also talk a bit about the regional scale rail interests we have. So first slide, please. So just to introduce transport for the East Midlands, the TfEM board brings together the statutory local transport authorities in the region within a forum in order to provide collective leadership on strategic transport issues. This year, actually, the TfEM board refreshed their strategic statement for rail, which reiterates their commitment to rail as a priority as part of the transport mix, and also the ambition of the board for continuous improvement within the region. The refreshed version actually closer reflects the spirit of the recent collaboration agreement with the DfT, but also more modern policy changes that have emerged since the original version was done, such as the Williams-Shapps white paper and also the transport decarbonisation strategy. Next slide, please. So moving on to the agreement itself. In previous years, TfEM worked very closely, hand in hand, with the DfT during the East Midlands Rail franchise competition. TfEM reflected and wanted to extend this engagement to more of an ongoing basis. But rather than alternative relationship models for regions that have been, you can observe that they've been adopted elsewhere nationally, the relationship for the East Midlands required more of a bespoke, incremental solution that both respected the polycentric geography of the East Midlands and also the existing political structures of the East Midlands that endured. At the end of 2020, TfEM secured a multi-year collaboration agreement with the DfT and their rail passenger market team. This was underlined by the co-funding of a new officer resource to support both parties, and which is protected by an NDA. So it's very much working closely inside with the department. Whilst importantly, this collaboration agreement does not change the DfT's responsibilities, we do see the mechanics of this agreement as an initial basis for future engagement with new rail administrators like GBR. Next slide, please. And now, because of this new approach, we have been able to support a regional presence with broader organisations and forums. Importantly, for the East Midlands TOC engagement, from October 22 next year, a direct award to EMR is proposed under a new contract term called National Rail Contract. This is similar to the current IRMA in terms of revenue risk allocation, but it officially ends the original franchise specification and is more long-term, potentially up to the rest of the decade before the actual GBR PSC competition completes. And so there really is an ongoing role for collaboration year on year. Midlands Connect, I think, is important to pull out here. It's helpful to differentiate TfEM to Midlands Connect. We look to Midlands Connect for rail planning with a regional focus and maintaining the business case evidence base. TfEM do not duplicate this role. I mean, there are many other parties on that slide that I've not mentioned, and we don't have time to go through each individually. The intent of this slide is mostly to try to start to illustrate the number of fronts that rail collaboration at a regional level involves, and to note, if you like, the consensus that most of these share on the benefits of prioritising rail. I think we can move on to the next slide. If we just try and take a step back, the agenda for the region for rail investment and collaboration around that is going to be shaped by something that was recently published, which is called the IRP, the Integrated Rail Plan, which I'll come on to and mention separately. But in terms of choreography, and is the awaited rail network enhancement pipeline, which I think the Network Rail speaker mentioned earlier, the RNEP, which is the most immediate tool. And this is going to be influenced by many sort of concurrent planning sources that are relevant for the East Midlands, and there are some examples listed here. But also separately, the Levelling Up Fund and Towns Funds, which are important funding gateways that members may be closely aware of, and also the Restoring a Railway Fund that we've already talked about today. So looking at the major announcement of 2021, which is the IRP itself, I think we can go on to the next slide. So far for the IRP, it's early days and no funding announcements have been shared publicly on the specific scheme phase progression, because there's a lot in there. But things like the newly announced plans for further tranches of East Coast mainline enhancements are something we're going to be very heavily interested to see what occurs there. You know, the IRP is if you look at is the main direction of the government's policy for rail enhancement in terms of the strategic investment and how it integrates the HS2 ambitions. And it's for us as a region, it's worth sort of reflecting that there's been a decade's worth of regional level planning that will now have to be reviewed, including development of train service options for HS2, now utilising a proposed mixed-use Midland Main Line, looking at the options for HS2 to serve Leeds and to do that swiftly in order to minimise the existing blight. There'll have to be a re-review of the East Midlands Gateway connectivity studies, updates to the East Midlands HS2 growth strategy, also to reflect the revised development propositions that IRP now advises. It's worth noting that TfEM is in early discussions with Midlands Connect on the scope of early technical work to understand some of our choices resulting from IRP. And this is actually one of the 4 pillars of our future activity. I think the next slide helps explain that. So we're also working, as well as with Midlands Connect, with the DFT and with our top colleagues EMR on some incremental analysis. And we've also got some analysis at a regional level that we have external technical resources to help us progress with a very small research budget that we have. And finally, I just wanted to make members aware that in the new year, we plan to commission development of a piece of evidence on making the case of why rail in the East Midlands as a region is important, rather than merely focusing on the what specification. We've seen that we think that this will be quite valuable contextually at this time, with a number of the uncertainty and the changes that are going on within the industry. And actually, we've also seen similar evidence submissions from elsewhere that we can look to emulate from industry bodies and also from operators like LNER. I think we'll go on to the final slide. So finally, I just wanted to say a couple of words on the reform white paper. TfEM has already established contacts with the stood up GBR transition team, looking at the whole industry strategic 30-year plan. And most recently, also the teams looking at the NRC and PSC operator contracts, as well as other reforms that actually remain led by the DFT teams themselves. There's a lot going on, and it's actually quite spread out over a number of different teams. So there's lots of fronts to keep informed with. I also just wanted to reflect this morning that there are policy developments significant for rail in the region beyond merely the white paper and beyond merely those reforms. And things that are actually at the heart of many local transport authority plans. I mean, in July, the government published its decarbonising transport paper, and whilst the principles of the report are, heartily recommended to be welcomed, a defined funded set of actions are still yet awaited. And so really that brings me to sort of a conclusion, which is rail has a key role for furthering our shared regional aims, and those will endure. And partners have actually taken now some incremental steps forward as a collective across the region. And hopefully today's presentation has given you a bit of a flavour of that. Thank you.
Any questions, anybody? Councillor Ashton, briefly.
Thank you very much. I think really exciting opportunities that are perhaps going to come out of this. The only couple of points I'd raise at this stage, picking up on the decarbonisation of traction, and to link that with other schemes. I noticed on the map there, Newark was highlighted as a point on the East Coast Main Line that may need attention. It would be remiss of me not to channel the thoughts of former Councillor Brewis, who were very profound on these matters. Insofar as if we're looking at bang for buck and decarbonisation of traction, then the scheme that would genuinely deliver that in Lincolnshire would be the electrification of the joint line between Peterborough and Doncaster, which may well be deliverable for substantially less than trying to solve the grade separated junction at Newark, which, whilst is fairly straightforward on paper, taking into account the River Trent and other obstacles that are nearby, could very well become a hugely expensive project, which makes the work recently achieved at Warrington seem like an absolute bargain. Also, thought might be worth looking at the redundant line or abandoned line between Skellenthorpe and going over the Trent into Nottinghamshire, as again another alternative of solving the issues at Newark to try and get between Lincoln and Nottingham. Simply to say that there are other options, and it would be really worthwhile to keep those at forefront of mind, rather and perhaps achieve two things at the same time.
Thank you, and thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item, and I move that the committee receives the report and presentations by colleagues and partners, and request our comments and views expressed as recorded to be taken into account. Further, we request that future updates are shared with this committee for information by officers. Does anyone dissent? Sorry. Okay. Okay, thank you, that is agreed. I would like to thank our guest presenters for taking the time out of their busy schedules to attend this committee meeting and for answering our questions and providing assurance. As you may now be leaving this meeting, I would like to wish you and your families a happy Christmas and all the best for the new year. And we are now going to just take a 10-minute break before the next item. Thank you. Order. Can everyone just get sat down and we can get on with the meeting? That'd be great. Thank you. Right, so item 6, performance report, Q2, for the 1st of July 2021 to the 30th of September 2021. This item is on pages 27 to 90 of the pack, and it invites the committee to receive a report which sets out the performance of the highways services, including the major highways schemes, update Lincolnshire Highways Performance Report and the Highways and Transport Complaints Report. The item will be presented by Tom Gifford, Client and Contract Manager. The committee is asked to consider and comment on the detail of the performance contained in the report and recommend any changes or actions to the executive member for Highways, Transport and IT. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, councillors. I won't go through the report in detail, but I'll just run through the highlights. So the report deals with our current 3 major schemes that are underway, which are the Grantham Southern Relief Road, Spalding Western Relief Road and North Hykeham Relief Road. The report does go into some detail around some of the other fairly major projects that we've got underway at the moment. It covers the range and gives an update on the progress on all of those schemes. To move on to the performance data, we have performance for our 3 contracts, for each of our contractors. So with Balfour Beatty for our highway works term contract, with WSP for our professional services contract, for Colas for our traffic signals maintenance contract. There's a suite of client indicators, and then the operation of this group as an alliance. So a suite of indicators that bring all of these strands together and measure the range of performance that can't be individually affected by one of the members. Performance has gone up generally across the contracts, dropped slightly for Balfour Beatty this quarter, but actually is still higher than it has been as an average level. Client indicators are rising and are on a consistently upward trend at the moment. There's a lot of work gone in the background to try and identify improvement plans. So where individual indicators are failing, we've incorporated improvement plans that have been responded to by each of the partners and ourselves as Lincolnshire County Council as the client element of that work. So actually those plans are coming to fruition and are in place and under operation at the moment. We set ourselves a much more challenging performance regime at the start of this revised set of contracts. So the performance level on the face of the data doesn't look as good as it has done in the past. But actually, what we're dealing with is a much more challenging set of indicators and a much more direct and focused set of indicators, looking at the things that we perceived as not going so well in the previous arrangement that we had. So there's some detail in the report on those elements. In terms of work carried out on the contract over the period, we carried out just over 12,000 individual defect repairs. So the vast majority of those being potholes, but also a number of other incidences that occurred over the period. So there was some bad weather that we experienced over the period. So there was quite a few emergency tree jobs that needed to be carried out. So we've had a number of works, but yeah, so essentially just over 12,000 works. There's some detail around the distances and the amount of work that we've carried out in more scheme-based work. So the kind of headlines of 27 miles of carriageway patching and surfacing, 41 miles of footway resurfacing and reconstruction. We've cut 16,000 miles of grass and we've cleansed over 40,000 gullies during that time period. We've been carrying on with the operation of our community maintenance gangs, which were awarded additional funding over the course of the previous year, and we're moving that funding forward into taking some of those key elements of work into what we're terming minor works gangs for next year as well. The professional services contract continues to operate. So we have WSP supporting our own internal operation and fulfilling staff. We've got around 27 full-time staff working in Lincoln supplied by WSP, plus their work on major schemes at the moment in Grantham and Spalding in particular. The traffic signals contracts have had 97 emergency faults and just under 350 standard faults over the course of the period, and have been underway working on a number of major works. So the Newark Road, Station Road, Moor Lane Junction was refurbished and completed, despite some minor delay due to a COVID outbreak among the gangs. So at the time we lost a number of workforce, and then there was a water leak from an Anglian water utility service that actually flooded the site. So we had a small delay. In terms of complaints, the complaints number as a headline has increased significantly over this period last year. Clearly a reflection of where we are in the COVID situation at the moment. What's interesting is that although the number of complaints has increased significantly, the actual number that get taken through into stage 2 for for really detailed further investigation hasn't changed at all and remains very low. So 5 complaints were taken through to stage 2, and of those 5, none were fully upheld. So the complaints data is reflecting a really positive usage of trying to resolve complaints as early as possible and taking a much more proactive approach to resolving complaints before they escalate into the late stages. Just a quick update on social value within the contract. So we've currently got 5 apprentices in place across our partners, and there are a number of other apprentices in place across some of our major schemes. So Eurovia and Galliford Try are both employing apprentices across the major schemes, which is part of their social value commitment to those schemes. And so further to that as well, we have 2 graduates in position, a year in industry placement, and 1 member of the Kickstarter program. So some really positive impact from these contracts into the workforce for Lincolnshire. We're doing quite a lot of work at the moment with offering support into educational provisions, so school visits, whether that's mentoring or providing model projects for students to work on. There's been a lot of work carried out with Lincoln College over the period about assessing the curriculum to which they're going to be putting forward as part of their revised curriculum for next year. And so we've got underway with our start of our councillor suggested schemes. We've been going out doing early contractor involvement on those schemes. It looks like we're going to be starting construction on 2 or 3 of them very early in the new year, once provided the winter maintenance service manages to maintain. And the councillor, the members app for councillors to allow us to provide direct information and really target the right kind of information that will be useful for you as councillors. So in summary, the contracts continue to operate pretty well. They're offering good value for money. We carried out a recent peer review where we actually came out top of the value for money scoring across a range of other authorities. There are some significant risks at the moment. I'm sure you're all aware of the difficulties with the materials, and price increases across the contracts are significant, particularly in those materials areas. So steel, any steel-related products, any cement-related products, asphalt-related products, and raw aggregates are all very difficult to get hold of. And when we do get them, the price increase has been significant over the course of this year. We're looking at around 20 to 25% on some of those items as an overnight increase in a number of cases. And the other major risk at the moment is related to resourcing. It's been mentioned earlier on in the presentations, but we are also suffering staff losses to HGV to go into HGV driving. So our gully tanker service has had 100% turnover over the course of the last year, just from staff leaving to take up HGV roles, and we're experiencing that across the piece. Engineers are very difficult to recruit at the moment. HS2 is pulling a lot of resource across the country, so we're definitely feeling those knock-on effects. I think that's it for a summary. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Dyer.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, Tom, for the report. And I have to say, much of my experience as being a new councillor with highways actually has been very positive. So that's great. But just a few observations. Page 189, curbing jobs. And I can see, pardon me, sorry, it's not on page 189. Curbing jobs on the performance data, 189 carried out in the last quarter. Do you know the average wait time for these jobs? Because I don't think there is a performance measure, is there, on how long it takes to get around to doing these jobs. So I'm just curious if we know how long people have been waiting for these jobs to be done. Minor point, on page 31 of the report, I think you're discussing the performance of a contractor. And I think the descriptive word used was solid. They were a solid contractor. Is there a more appropriate word to use that's not solid? Just coming on to the scheme that the LCC carried out in North Highcombe, and I know that you referred to them as a minor delay. I don't think I would as a local councillor. But are there any lessons to be learned from that? For instance, I think the leak was discovered on a Tuesday, and Anglian Water didn't come out for a whole week to actually remedy those works. So actually that was quite a long gap to wait for Anglian Water. So I'm just curious to know, why did it take Anglian Water so long to come out for a scheme that was on such a busy road? And just in respect to that scheme, have we done any review on actually how successful that scheme has been at traffic flow during peak hours? I'll give you an example. Before those schemes were carried out, my other half used to use that road every day, coming from the A46 northbound. And now the traffic is so bad, people are cutting through the Manor Farm estate, which isn't designed to be used as a rat run at all. So I'm just curious to know what actually is the impact on traffic in North Highcombe. Has it made it better? Has it made it worse? And finally, the Members app, I think it's really, really good. It's great to see the works that have been carried out by the contractors. It's great to see the pictures, and it's great to see what is going to be carried out, but it is slightly buggy. And I don't know if colleagues have noticed, my app, I have to delete it and reinstall it every couple of weeks or so, just because it is so buggy. So I'm just curious to know if that's been picked up at your end. Thank you, Chairman.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor. I'll try and address those points. So, in terms of curbing jobs specifically, we could work out what those average wait times are. I suspect we could do that through the system, so we could understand that. I don't have that data to hand. One of the performance measures looks specifically at hitting the committed times. So we look across the piece at compliance with the times that are set out. So although curbing jobs will be in that package, in that suite of measures, they're not specifically identified, but we can investigate that and see what we can come back to. I take your point on the use of the word solid. Absolutely, we'll look to remedy that. In terms of North Highcombe, I don't have the data as to where we are with traffic flow improvements. There was a significant exercise undertaken together with Anglian Water to look at why it had taken so long for them to attend site and to get out and solve the problem. So I think we can certainly come back to you with the details of that, and we'll see what we can produce for the traffic flow data. The Members app issue has been noted and is currently with the developers. They're doing some testing on it this week. I think it's specifically Apple devices that seem to have the problem. I'd noticed it myself, so I've been responding and in conversation with the developers over the course of the past 2 or 3 weeks, because I agree that's very frustrating, and it is really disappointing. So it is something we're looking to resolve.
Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chairman. Start with on the social value. The 3 partnerships must be worth millions upon millions. And to say there's 5 apprentices looks rather poor. Of those 5 apprentices, what qualifications are they actually working for towards? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't know which exact qualifications they're working for, but I can find that out and confirm that to you. That's 5 apprentices at the moment as we speak. So there were a number of apprentices from last year. That number dropped slightly as one of the apprentices has actually just got a job within Balfour Beatty. So we're actually turning those apprenticeships into full-time jobs, which is really great to see, and she's going to continue with her studies as well. But we'll come back and confirm which qualifications they are working towards.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like my colleague from North Hykeham, I think the term minor delays is a sales term. Sat at my end of the thing, being the councillor for the Moor Lane side of the crossroads, it wasn't a minor delay, and I must say I was a little bit disappointed in the updates for myself as a local councillor. The best updates I got was by walking down to the site and speaking to the guys on site, who were taking some stick, I must admit, but they were very polite and very helpful. What they did assure me would happen is, as part of the commissioning, things kept going wrong, and they said that there would be a full internal review of the things that went wrong, and they kindly did explain them to me, and they were understandable. But I'd like to know if that review did happen and what was going to be learnt out of it. As far as the traffic flow is concerned, I actually live on Newark Road, and I'm actually finding that it's probably better. The only time where it might be more difficult is at the school leaving times, and then life can get a little bit difficult. But in general, whenever anybody's complained to me, and I've gone down and checked, the stories of 2 or 3 vehicles getting through only, I've never witnessed that. I've only ever seen a reasonable amount go through. And then apprenticeships were mentioned, and I have, from the corporate parenting side, come back a couple of times about the apprenticeships and about highways working with the corporate parenting team to ensure that they're kept up to date. I'm absolutely delighted to hear that communication is in place now and is working extremely well. So I thank your team for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor, and we'll make sure that we come back to you and answer your queries on North Hykeham and the formal review. But I take your point about my language. Noted.
Yeah, Councillor Rawlins, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to go back to the social value paragraph, I note you mentioned the volunteering days, and I just wondered if you could give us an update on how those member schemes were advancing. I have put in for some volunteering days in Scotland going towards Sudbrook for one of the footpath schemes, and I just wondered how those were progressing in terms of working up some actually plans on the ground. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Councillor. So in terms of councillor volunteering schemes, as I say, we're underway with doing site visits to all of the sites that we've had suggestions for. So we are nearing completion of all of those visits now, and we'll be able to put together a more formal programme with regard to when we'll be able to get to the works and the likely cost impacts for where materials are being provided by another group, or by the parish, or there's a number of those sort of schemes. We were hoping to be able to get started on a couple of them before Christmas, but our resourcing level has been a real challenge, and so getting the schemes planned in sufficiently clearly with winter season ongoing has been really difficult. So we're going to be after Christmas before we get to those schemes, but we will come back with a plan of when we will get to those schemes. Our intention is to come back and feedback to all councillors as soon as we're able, and we'll be updating Richard Davis on a regular basis with those details.
Just ask a subsidiary question regarding that.
Yeah, okay.
Very briefly, obviously for some of the parishes, particularly the scheme I put forward, there would be a cost to the parish council, and obviously they've set the budget now for the council tax for the next year. So it would be good to get some feedback on those schemes as well, of what cost would be expected to be borne by local groups, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll certainly make sure we do that as part of the feedback.
Thank you, Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I hope you recorded, Tom, that Councillor Rowe did admit to walking down regularly and the crew's getting a lot of stick. I wasn't quite sure whether he meant he was giving them stick or he was recording it. But not so much a question. I'd just like to show my appreciation. Holding and roundabouts mentioned within this report, and the way that contract's been carried out, the way the work's been done, and from what I can see now, the improvement it's made is to be appreciated. On the back of the Rugby Club junction being done the year before, then traffic flows in that area I think are going to be substantially better, and it's great to see that kind of investment. But just a warning and I suppose a question. I'm monitoring a vigilante daffodil planting group on social media who are making plans to replace daffodil bulbs that were first planted 45 years ago, according to them. And a serious question really is do you know if there's going to be any planting on that roundabout? Because the last thing I want to see is people going out en masse onto that now 3-lane roundabout, planting daffodil bulbs and other flowers without any kind of permission and putting themselves at risk.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't know the detail of the planting that's due to finalise the scheme, but we will come back to you and clarify that, because we can totally agree it's not an acceptable way to finish off what is essentially a really positive scheme. So yeah, we'll come back and clarify that for you.
Thank you, Councillor Strangle.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your report as well. Under Appendix A, you mentioned the North Highcombe Relief Road, and I'm delighted that it's moving forward to going into a planning application in 2023, which is great. I appreciate the time taken to put these schemes into actual fruition, i.e. the Eastern Bypass, which I remember dealing with way back in the last chapter days in the early 2000s. The problem I think I have is that just like the Eastern Bypass, it's single carriageway, and if we're taking heavy vehicles up from the A17, from the agricultural belt of Lincolnshire, if you like, what will happen is those that want to go perhaps up the A15, instead of going round the eastern side of Lincoln, will come round the western side of Lincoln. And the problem we have in the southern side of the city, and I represent Birchwood, is that it runs from dual carriageway coming from the north down into single carriageway around about the Skellingthorpe roundabout, and then into Wisby. We've got a gap where we go into dual carriageway for a short period. And I appreciate that stretches of the current bypass are either under Highways England and parts of it are under the local authority, the Highways Authority, which is Lincolnshire. I worry that this fact of moving from dual carriageway into single, etc., is going to put a severe impact on the south-west side of the city. Have you got any plans to try and put the existing bypass into dual carriageway, and I'm talking specifically between the Skellingthorpe roundabout and the Bentley Hotel roundabout, if I can call it that, Pennell's roundabout? That's my question. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to note that that section of the bypass is Highways England, and so our conversations around whether that's able to be dualled or not take place in the context of our relationship with Highways England and the national funding that that they deliver. So I'll probably just note those comments at the moment, and we'll try and get back to you with a more full answer than that in the time being, if that's okay.
Yeah, I do.
Thank you, Chairman. Just very briefly, yes, I remember Paul, before he retired, saying there was great news that we were going to dual carriageway the bit from the Damons roundabout down to the Whisby roundabout, and that came under Lincolnshire Authority, not Highways England, and that was done, and it's a good stretch of dual carriageway, albeit very short. And I really would like this council to put the pressure on Highways England to try and get those roads that are still single dualled, and preferably before the Highcombe Relief Road goes in. That's what I'm trying to push for, because that will help to alleviate a lot of the problems we have, especially around the Doddington Road roundabout at Damons, and indeed the Skellingthorpe roundabout. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chairman. Two quick things on the app. I think the app is a fantastic thing and I use it often. I was surprised that on the app, the pins that you put in, when something is complete, it doesn't disappear. I presume the app will get some updates as the years go on. Is that something you've got on the agenda, to remove things that's completed? And the second question is, when you report something, I've reported something on a road close to my location, and there were some contractors there filling in potholes. I asked them if they were doing the ones at either end that I'd reported, and they said they were only due to complete a couple. Surely, if there's a road with potholes, it'd been accepted on the app, it said works in progress. Why would they not do them all together to save time? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I think we're probably talking about the access onto Fix My Street rather than the kind of actual councillor's app, but using it through the app, I take the point. Yes, items should remain in place so that you can see the works that have been carried out, and I think there is a filter option to be able to get rid of completed works, but I'll look into that and come back to you with an answer. In terms of potholes being fixed, you're absolutely correct that it's completely logical that we should just fill in all of the potholes when we visit site, and that's one of the things we're definitely trying to get to. The nature of the potholes on our network make that very difficult. We obviously have differing response times for differing potholes, so we need to be able to get to certain locations within a certain length of time so that we are able to meet our statutory duty and our response times. So that doesn't always lead to being able to program them in the most efficient way as we sometimes would like. Pressured resourcing, puts that into clear perspective. But we should be aiming to try and get to potholes in a single visit. It's one of the things that we're pushing for in this revised contract, and our model actually helps push that along. So our changed model for the contract, where we're working on essentially to a price per defect unit, tries to do that. So it is something that we would really like to see improving, and it's one of the measures that we look at. So it is a really valid point.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to agree with Councillor Gibson. Trying to explain to a resident why the whole outside of her house ain't been done and the two next to it have been, it's a bit hard at times. Just to be clear, I'd like to know when tree work is carried out, what budget, is there a separate budget for that? And also, when a complaint's made, who decides if it goes forward or not? Thank you.
For tree works come out of our overall highways budget, so they are part of the main budget envelope. It does depend on what we're needing to do with the tree work. So emergency works come out of our main emergency funds. So if we're having to get out onto the network immediately, whereas there is a series of planned tree works as well that do come out of a slightly different budget pot. So essentially, they are part of the main highways budget. In answer to the question, and yes, I totally understand the difficulties. Because it is a really obvious thing that it's better if we can just get there and repair all potholes in a single visit. As I say, being able to match our response times does make that difficult. The gangs will carry are able to carry a certain amount of material. There's obviously a certain length of time that material is viable during the day. So they're out trying to fix potholes to meet our response times, and at the moment, that is a real challenge to them. But you're right, it's something that we are all aiming to do, and we should be getting better at doing as we go forward.
Do you want to ask another question, Councillor Clark?
Yeah, there was a question about complaints. Who decides if a complaint goes forward or not?
Apologies, Councillor Clark. Yeah, so complaints follow a set out corporate procedure. So we have an agreed procedure that essentially uses our business support service to monitor and request whether those complaints need further detail, and they liaise with our officers to do that. So from that point forward, they are taken and very often resolved directly with the complainant. If the complainant is unhappy with the answer that we're given, they have the opportunity to take that complaint further, and that moves through a series of stages to look at whether the complaint is upheld or partially upheld or dismissed. That view is taken by somebody outside of the highway service, so it's not part of a kind of internal review of whether a complaint matches. But the complaints procedure is laid out as part of the corporate suite of policies.
Thank you, Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the verbal report. That was very interesting. I just want to return, please, to the Holdingham roundabout. It's a comment rather than necessarily a complaint. I've not been using it during the roadworks. I bow out. I'm coming from Boston, so I bow out halfway along the bypass and come through Leaford and come through Ruskington, and then my own little route, interesting route from then on. Last Friday, I thought, right, I'll try it again. But I was disappointed because it's a combined lane on the right-hand side for the A17 going straight onto Newark and the people going to Lincoln on the A15. But the next lane was solely dedicated to Peterborough. And our lane, our right-hand lane, was back as far as it used to before. But on the Peterborough dedicated lane, there was a car, now and then another car. It was, it was plain sailing. And I discussed that with Councillor Brooks now, who's gone, and he said he anticipates what's going to happen is people wanting to go to Newark are going to use the Peterborough lane to get quicker to the roundabout, start coming round the roundabout, and then merge into the inner lane before going off again to on the A17 to Newark. Whereas on the right-hand lane, when we're coming to Lincoln, we haven't got much choice. It's a question of whether the lane marking could perhaps be better. But it's only a comment. I didn't use it today. I decided I'd go back my Ruskington route again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and we'll aim to come back to you with a response on that. I think because we'll be able to look through the traffic data and hopefully be able to get some further information for you on that.
Thank you, Councillor Rawlins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wondered if there's any update to be had on the business case proposal for the Heckington duelling.
Sorry, thank you, Councillor. The business cases are due to be developed. We're waiting back for the feasibility studies, so the business cases will flow from those feasibility studies, which are due back relatively early in the new year. Actually, they're underway at the moment. So hopefully we should fairly soon be able to give you a more formal update on how those business cases are progressing.
Thank you, Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a response back for Tom and for Councillor Austin. I think some of the problems that's been caused hopefully will disappear because there was some additional works being done which barriered off the on the roundabout the lane for turning right for Lincoln, so it was forcing traffic into one lane in the middle. So hopefully that'll disappear, but at least now I've discovered where some of the extra traffic is coming through Ruskington.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item, and I move that we endorse the report and our satisfaction of the performance achieved in Q2, and our comments and recommendations are shared with the Executive Member for Highways, Transport and IT. Does anyone dissent? If so, please indicate now. Thank you, that is agreed.
Before you move on to the next item, I would like to make a comment about those papers, but I didn't want to be shooting the messenger, who was, doing what he was instructed to do, basically. But I noted that report, it went from pages 10 to 46, or that's the bit that I'm talking about. And I'm a mathematician. I'm also, to a certain degree, a statistician. But the majority of that report, whereas what was spoken, the verbal report was very, very interesting. I was bored silly with all those figures, repetitive and rather meaningless, numerical data. And for example, 1% in numbers, then they translated it into points to create a larger difference, and it went on like this. And I felt that this statistically, if this had been a trial for a drug or something like that, this is statistically meaningless. And I feared, I talked about this with my husband last night, and he said, was this as an exercise to blind us with numbers or something? But that verbal report was so good. And yet I passed through pages and pages and pages of this, and I was concerned how much officer time had gone into producing that. We were talking about officer time in relation to things on climate change on Friday, weren't we? And could there have been perhaps a more concise way of doing it without having to show us how every formula was arranged, derived and so on? So, this is just something that I'm looking at it from the point of view of a professional, although long since retired mathematician and a bit of statistics thrown in. But, you
Okay.
know,
Yeah, thank
was,
you.
I think have I made my point,
Yeah, I
please?
think you have. Yeah, thank you
you.
very much, Councillor Austin, and I'm sure this will be fed back to officers. I mean, I think it's always good to have facts and statistics. You know, so I'm always quite happy to see that in a report, to be honest. Councillor Purton-Williams would like to speak, so please do.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think it's just from previous experience, we've had people asking us for the information. So yes, some of it can be a bit boring at times, but perhaps just skip through the bits that you don't really want to read and listen to when Tom gives his very good verbal report. I hope that explains it slightly better, Councillor Austin.
Absolutely, thank you very much. I totally agree with that. Thank you. So moving on to item 7, highways, gully cleansing, drainage repair schemes and surface water flooding. This item is on pages 90 to 93 of the pack, sets out reactive, cyclic and planned aspects of the highways drainage maintenance, including low-level flooding response. The item will be presented by Richard Fennick, County Highways Manager. The committee is asked to consider and comment on the detail contained in the update and recommend any changes or actions. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. And this report is an update that's become a regular feature of these meetings. And Sean Butcher, who's the County Programme Manager as my counterpart within Highways, is going to help me deliver this report. In the interest of time, as I realise we're very pressed, I am going to make this a whistle-stop tour of the detail within the report. Sean and I will sort of cover the areas that our respective teams focus on to allow people to ask questions at the end. And hopefully that's the best way to do this, rather than us go through the intricate detail of the numbers, especially after the previous comments, which we don't want to bore people with. So I think with that, I'll hand over to Sean to talk about the cyclic aspects of drainage cleansing in general.
Thank you, Richard, and good morning, Mr. Chairman, fellow councillors. And taking that point on board, yes, we'll do it very briefly. So in the report, you'll see that we have 190,000 drainage assets that we clean on an annual basis. And to date, we've managed to clean around 98,000 of those. Programme has been going reasonably well up until recently. It does identify quite a number of defects within there that we've listed, showing the types that we do. Things like jam lids, broken or missing ironwork, damaged pots or block connections. What we do now in the field is we take specific photos and gather data, and then that's able to give to Richard and his teams and actually see which of those that we need to prioritise and do something about more urgently. So a better drainage cleansing programme we feel we're getting now. Tom did allude earlier to issues that we've had across this contract, and particularly to drainage cleansing. We've lost, I think it was 7 drivers more recently. We've only got 8 tankers in the county ordinarily, so that had quite significant impact in the recent months. What we have been doing, thankfully, is doing some more recruitment with ACL, and they've brought additional tanker drivers in. But like everybody, I think we're fighting for the same crop of people. To mitigate that, we've been trying to look at some of the things that we can do to balance out that problem. We're moving some of the works around and trying to identify those that are more critical over the next few months. And fingers crossed, we should get most of the works done by the end of the financial year. I think that's the first part covered in brief, Richard.
Yes, thank you, Sean. And if I now cover customer transactions as it's titled within the report, which essentially covers all of the routes in for members of the public, as well as our elected members to contact the teams. As you'll see throughout the report, we do have a very, there's many teams within Highways that deal with different aspects of the drainage service, but we work as one team, and my teams, the local Highways teams, are generally the first point of contact for these. And within this report, I also speak for and cover the emergency response service, which is handled by the network resilience team. So I am sort of speaking on behalf of Darryl Redford, who's the manager of the network resilience team on the emergency side of things. Again, I won't go through in detail how we've set out our approach to dealing with customer reports. but I did want to highlight point 4 within that, which is that over the last few months, we have taken on board feedback from members and from members of the public, which is that people are much more frustrated if they're waiting a long time for an answer than they are if they get an answer in a short amount of time, which maybe isn't particularly the answer that their perfect answer. So we are focusing on where there's issues that we're not able to respond to either cyclically or reactively or even as an emergency, and it's going to be a very big scheme, a long-term, possibly partnership scheme on flooding issues that isn't an emergency. We're making sure our officers go back out and explain that we aren't going to be taking any immediate action with things, but that we do give a bespoke response to explain why, and that we aren't ignoring the issue. It's going to take a lot longer for us to actually come to a resolution, just to make sure that there's an update out there. So it's a slightly probably firmer approach than we've taken before, where you would see that inquiries about longer standing flooding issues might be on Fix My Street for quite a long time without any update. There will now be an update, but it might not be the final answer in that case. And I'll hand back over to Sean for the section on minor drainage improvements.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, so we'd ordinarily had a budget for quite a number of years of around 300,000 to do some of the follow-up work. So where we've identified as an issue with the pipes or the drainage system, Richard and his teams may do some jetting. Where that doesn't work, we try and do an improvement scheme which may put additional assets in, improve the capacity. So this year, thankfully, that was increased to 600,000. So we are able to do more of those improvement schemes. They are small in nature, typically around 10, 15,000, but doubling those hopefully will mean that a number of councils are getting to see some improvements in their areas.
I think that leads me on to our minor works gangs, as we're calling them. Tom Gifford mentioned that within his report. So just a slight change of terminology within our team, that the aspects of the community maintenance initiative that we had running last year, we've carried certain parts of that through. One of the key ones is the minor drainage gangs, and we're just referring to them as minor works gangs for various things, but we do have AJET doing bigger drainage investigations and dig down work to repair things that the jetting crews can't deal with. So it's sort of an in-between between a large scheme and the day-to-day reactive or cyclic maintenance. Just the highlight figures are that so far since we've been running that, we've had them attend 305 individual sites. They might be working on those sites for a few days or a day each, but they've essentially been working every day, every working day of the year. And we've already got another 204 sites designed and ready to go for them to go out and either do CCTV surveys, root cutting, some minor pipe replacement, that kind of thing, just to solve problems. So they are our kind of boots on the ground in terms of doing what we can without having to rely on long-term schemes to aid with any flooding issues.
Yeah, next part we talk about is the development drainage funding. Again, this was a successful bid that we made almost 2 years ago to try and invest some additional money with the Floods and Water team. Working with them and Richard's team, we identified a number of schemes. I think at previous presentations we've given, there was concern that the money wasn't being spent quick enough. I think I'm pleased to report that we're looking to spend at least 1.4 million by the end of this financial year. This calendar year, and then the remaining schemes are planned next year. Like everything with drainage, the more investigation you do, the more you find. So some of the more complex ones we've got at Chowillingham, Curtin, Scoven and the like, I think they're growing in nature as we need to do additional works. But again, we've got some good schemes designed, and likewise our contractor Balfour Beatty have brought in additional drainage gangs to support that need that hopefully you've seen, that we're doing quite significant drainage program in all of this work. And internally, we've managed to bring in some specialist drainage engineers into TSP, which again gives us that more professional approach to doing these schemes right first time, which I think you'll all support is something that we need to do. Richard.
Yes, thanks, Sean. And moving on for that, the final section is just in terms of our Section 19 investigations. I've said previously, but we really do have the drive to not only work as one team within Highways, but to work as one council with other teams within Lincolnshire County Council, and also with our partners outside of that. So we have focused on that collaboration with the floods and water team, and also private water companies, internal drainage boards, and the district councils in terms of flooding responses, with Highways being a focus of that, with the local highways managers chairing the local groups. We're sharing as much data as we can. I feel that over the last 6 months, the control of our information about what we know about flooding issues, from the very smallest drainage problems up to the larger ones that are going to take a few years to resolve or potentially longer. There is a clear hierarchy in place now of how that flows from the emergency teams and the first responders that are capturing data about flooding as it happens, through my teams that deal with the more day-to-day issues, and then we'll feed up into Sean's team for works that can't be done on a day-to-day basis and require a larger scheme, and up into technical services partnership for the really large, wider, broader flooding schemes. So we continue to do that. We continue to try and work together, and also to use the data to make sure that we're spending funds in the most responsible way and in the places that help the most people. So that does draw our report to an end. But we're, as I say, we've gone through that very quickly, and are happy to answer questions now and devote time to that, or always happy to take things away and feedback on detail and come back to you.
Thank you. Councillor Rawlins, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just picking up on Sean and Richard's point, or Sean's point specifically, on the development funding for the drainage schemes. It's been very welcome on my patch that a substantial amount of that funding was actually going to go to improve the Scotland drainage scheme, which, as Sean has pointed out, has grown in its complexity on further investigation. I wonder if Sean could just give me a little bit of a brief update here, perhaps on that specific scheme, and the broad nature of the schemes that are being looked at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. I think what I'd probably do is take that outside the meeting, because there is quite a lot of information that we could go through with you. It's being done by the technical team, which I don't represent, but I think we can give you a more detailed programme and probably some drawings on what we're trying to do at the location, if that's okay.
Thank you. Councillor Dyer.
Thank you, Chairman. Brief point, gully maintenance and gully cleaning. I live on a tree-lined street, and when the leaves fall, I've got a gully outside my house, and I clear it, so it's fine. But not everybody does that, so you end up with situations where gullies get blocked because of leaf fall. One, it can be slippery, but two, it does block and cause flooding. So I'm just curious to know, do LCC have any dialogue with the districts when it comes to street maintenance to ensure that actually they clear leaves from the streets before it causes a flooding problem, and also an issue for our guys to then go and clear the gully out with a pump? Thanks, Chairman.
I'll tell that one, Richard. Yeah, I think we've always tried to engage with district councils to try and plan and coordinate our works, be that in villages with trees or in the wider sweeping programmes that they do. Unfortunately, with the nature of Lincolnshire, you're probably aware, we can't do that everywhere during the months of November and now, where the trees are unfortunately still shedding their leaves. So we try to mitigate that, and also we ordinarily just done a carte blanche. You do that maintenance area, that maintenance area, that maintenance area, regardless of the issues locally. What we are trying to do, part of this drainage cleansing programme and others now, is pick up those sites where there are issues. So rather than waiting for the problem to happen, we're a bit more proactive in picking those up and hopefully alleviate those issues.
Okay, Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is basically going to be about the CCTV equipment, but I'll just say I have two drainage issues currently in my division. One is a major one. It's been on the Section 19 lot, and it's going to be, it's a very expensive one, which all being well is going to be done starting in January. That's in Curtin, which is a multi-agency one, because it's very complex. But I have another one which dates back to the end of January last year, and we're still waiting for the CCTV equipment to come and go down to see where this blockage is. And it'll be 6 weeks' time, it'll be a full year since that. I know it's not priority because it's on a small estate, but for those residents who were the wrong side of that, it was flooding right across the estate, but it didn't enter any properties. So for those people who, the other side of it, it was serious because they could only access, the elderly people could only access the bus by walking through people's gardens. Now, as time goes on, it's an old concrete estate road that's been tarmacked, you know, the bane of our lives, I think. And of course, more and more stuff is draining through into the gully. So my simple question is, how long do we have to wait for the CCTV equipment to find out where this blockage is? They know that it's a long way from the gully, but they don't know any more than that.
Thank you, Councillor. I can answer that question, or at least attempt to address it. I will have to take away the question for the detail around specifically that site and how long you will be waiting, which I'll do after this meeting, and I'll come back directly to you if that's okay, to give you an idea of timescales. To answer the question generally, as per the report, there are over 200 sites that we currently have identified that need that team to go and look at the issues there, which gives an idea of the scale of some of the drainage issues we are aware of across the county. It's been a great resource to have because we haven't had it running on this scale before, but it highlights that even with having it there, there's a lot of work ahead of us. What we have to do is, as you quite rightly pointed out, unfortunately, we are prioritising based on issues where we know that water has entered internal property or living accommodations, or it has been a risk to life. And so they're the ones that go at the front of the queue in terms of how we programme those works. And with the nature of flooding and with the nature of the weather, unfortunately, there is a pattern, but it's not as clear as you would expect us to. There's always new examples of flooding coming in as we have different weather events. It's not always the same places that flood. So we're constantly having to reprogram things. And that's why there can be quite a wait for things that unfortunately get knocked back by more priorities coming in. And they do work every day. As I've said, they work in 5 days a week constantly for nearly the last 2 years now. And I suspect that there will be work to keep them going for a good way into the future with the amount of new issues that are coming in. So that's the answer in general. I will take the specifics away and try and get you an answer. And myself or any of the local highways managers are happy to have conversations about specific sites and give an honest answer about where that will fall within the backlog of work that we've got to get through, and whether we can bring things forward based on new information or urgency.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion for this item. And I move that we endorse the report and request that our comments from the debate are taken under consideration. Does anyone dissent? If so, please indicate now. No, that's great. So moving on to item 8, Transport Connect Limited Tech All Company Update Report. This item is on pages 94 to 99 of the pack, provides an update on the activities and performance of the Council's Tech All Company Transport Connect Limited over the period of between May and October 2021. The item will be presented by Anita Ruffle, Head of Transport Services. In terms of the actions, the committee is asked to consider and comment on the detail of the performance and activity contained in the report, and to recommend any changes or actions to the executive member for highways, transport and IT. Over to you, Anita.
Thank you, members. Okay, as was said, this is a regular report. It covers May to October, and it covers both strategic and operational aspects of the business. And like the previous reports, I'll try and canter through just to bring out the salient points. In terms of strategic matters, firstly, financial oversight. The initial, I'm pleased to say, the initial loan that the company took from us has now been repaid in full, but it's obviously still making use of the revolving credit arrangement. TCL continue to prepare monthly accounts for us, and those are jointly reviewed by Transport Services Group and LCC's finance teams. We used the figures for the last 6 months to present a view to you, and I can tell you that shows a strong income performance, with the income levels being about 6.5% better than was budgeted. That's primarily down to the fact that they've taken on some additional maintenance work. They're now maintaining gritters, and members may recall I advised them of that at the last update. So obviously that's accounted for the income, but it's also necessitated some increased expenditure on setting up the new depot at Billingborough. But the net effect is essentially a modest surplus for the first 6 months, and that's expected to be the sort of outcome at the end of the year. TCL management provide all sort of satisfactory responses to anything that we ask of them, and we have no issues or concerns that are outstanding at all. In terms of the assurance, the company, as you know, was established over 5 years ago, and that it's grown since that time, both in terms of the company activity, but also its board membership. So the council's board representative has invited Assurance Lincolnshire to review the board's governance and resilience ahead of any sort of further phases of maturity, and we'll report on this in due course. As an advice, there's been no capital expenditure at all in terms of replacement vehicles over the period being reported on. And in terms of the business plan, no changes to that business plan, but it is regularly reviewed at the board meetings. I think it's just pulling out a little bit around the sort of gritter activity, in the fact that the company had to carry out a significant amount of work over the summer to bring gritters back to up to standard in readiness for the winter season. The reports from the network resilience team that look after the winter maintenance has been really positive, and you know, the company's efforts have been noted, and I'm pleased to say that all gritters were fully operational and ready to roll on the first day of the winter gritting season. On to operational matters. Following return of the schools back in September, unfortunately, a number of pupils at TCL carry were positive with COVID, and as a consequence, 3 of their drivers subsequently contracted the virus, and that brings the total to 5 since May. And it's unfortunate that the government's changed the way it supplies the lateral flow test kits now, and it means that TCL have to go to a reactive rather than a proactive testing regime. They are, however, still being proactive in terms of maintaining their cleaning standards, all of the protocols around COVID, etc. But they are now having to bear the full cost of that, given that the grants that we previously could access to support such initiatives and measures, unfortunately, are now no longer available. In terms of HR, obviously we set the depot up at Billingborough, and we were required to take on 3 technicians to undertake that work. But the company's also had to take on 4 new drivers and 3 passenger assistants during the period. That's a combination of people being sort of ill or retiring through ill health or age, but also because we're seeing some increased pupil numbers at some of our SEND schools. Members may be aware that there's a review of how SEND provision is provided across Lincolnshire, and that has impacts on numbers at those establishments. As you heard from a number of our colleagues in the reports earlier, TCL, like nearly all of the other operators in the county, are being impacted seriously by a shortage of drivers. They're not exempt from that. Recruitment is challenging, but we're just about there. And like every other firm, we'll be doing a sort of a recruitment campaign and taking sort of mitigation measures to try and strengthen the driving and crew resource. At the moment, the net staff number is 144. In terms of training, over the period, workshop technicians were trained in first aid as a bespoke course for them. Supervisors got refresher training in fire marshalling, and a number of the transport crews were trained in administering epilepsy meds. And we've got 3 drivers that remain off on long-term sick. In terms of legal compliance, pleased to say no issues around drivers' hours, and similarly no operator licence issues. So we've had no DVSA checks or anything during the period. The Transport Services Group did undertake a pre-planned but unannounced audit on the company at the Sandon School, which is one that they provide for, and I'm pleased to say that there were no compliancy concerns identified. MOT pass rates. Members will recall that we think MOT results are a useful indicator of the sort of maintenance standards that a company is carrying out. We've had 26 vehicles MOT'd during the period, and all but 2 passed first time. So the company's combined sort of pass rate, first time pass rate, is 92%, and that's above the national average, which sits at just below 89% at the moment. In terms of fuel, again, your members may recall that at the last update, I gave sort of a warning notice that fuel prices were rising and were likely to continue to rise. That has been the case. So back in April, we were talking about £1.20 a litre. We now, for October, had to pay £1.43, and we're hoping that's just about peaked, but we'll continue to monitor it closely. That's important given that the company does in excess of about 135,000 miles a month. So it's a big spend aspect. In terms of contract updates, we always regularly review the contracts that TCL provide for us. One of those contracts that was up for relet was the 5C. We determined that there was sufficient interest in the market, so we've put that back out to contract, and we've awarded it out to the commercial market. But TCL obviously are continuing to carry out other contracts for us where there's obviously a lack of interest or competition. The company's continued to meet all of its local bus commitments. It had a few challenges at the beginning of the school term where we had to put in some temporary arrangements, but those have all been settled down now. Vehicle damages and accidents over the period, there have been 4. 3 of those were third-party liability cases, and I'm happy that the installation of the CCTV on all of our Call Connect vehicles helped TCL and indeed many other operators to successfully evidence that there was third-party liability. Only one of the incidents were on the fault of TCL. There was minor damage to another vehicle, and that was dealt with through the company's insurance. and one complaint received by the company during the period, and that was about a lack of advance notice on a change of crew, and unfortunately it was unavoidable. The crew were taken ill on the Sunday evening, and the transport was required for first thing in the morning, and so no advance notice was possible. Other than the gritter maintenance, no new contracts have been taken on during the period. In terms of the property, because we've got a number of depots, the Barrowby depot lease has been renewed, and we are currently looking at an alternative site for Spalding operations, as the landlord in the location at the moment has just indicated a 25% increase on the rent. So we're just exploring alternatives. Last time I reported that there were a few issues around receiving goods from abroad, the supply chain. There was some issues. Happy to say that those have now been resolved and they've settled down. What we are seeing is an increase in terms of cost of certain goods and services, PPE, workwear, and some, to the manufactured parts, the prices are increasing. And as you just heard, so is the fuel. And we're also seeing that a number of suppliers are trying to tighten up on their payment terms, so they're wanting payment sooner. So in conclusion, as my role as the owner's representative, I have absolutely no concerns around TCL at this point in time. The company has grown steadily and its management structure remains lean. But most importantly, I think the company continues to be an invaluable asset for the council through the provision of its value for money services. It brings much needed additional capacity into the market. It allows the council to achieve some significant cost avoidance. And as we've heard today, it also allows us to support other areas, such as the winter maintenance, where those areas have come under pressure. That's the end of the report, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. It's now open to questions to the committee. So we have Councillor Rawlins start. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to Anita for a comprehensive report as always. Just on the assurance review, obviously I'm chair of the audit committee, so I'm rather interested in that. Obviously we're looking, our team's going to look at the board's governance and resilience. I take it that would include both the resilience of the governance and the resilience of the financial model going forward in a broad context. And I just wondered if that was the case and if Anita knows when they're likely to report. Second point was the drivers. A news article just caught my attention the other day about trying to bring back some people who had actually not long retired to fulfil these posts. If I don't know, that was some sort of a point that we may have considered, or is that not appropriate in this instance? And also, I think on the fuel, I think from an anecdotal perspective, certainly our agricultural fuel, it's been coming down quite dramatically in the last couple of weeks. Certainly way off the peak it was before, so that may help. And I think that was my points, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, in terms of the points raised around the assurance review, it was primarily focused on the governance and the suitability of the board setup, and are we looking at the right aspects, as opposed to the actual sort of financial detail. Because obviously, as I say, as the company grows, and goes into the next phase, we need to make sure that all of the measures and checks and balances we've got in place are fit for purpose. In terms of the report, we should be in a position to be able to give you an update at the next review. That's currently in train now. It was delayed because of COVID, but yeah, it's nearing its completion. In terms of the not long retired, I think it's probably fair to say we and everybody else has tried every element we can. If we are if we're fortunate enough to get some money through the BSIP bid that the council's put in, one measure we have put in there is to try and establish a training academy to help grow our own in terms of driving resource, etc. It won't be a short-term fix, but it will be something that will be able to give a bit of resilience to the county going forward. Quite honestly, there was driver gazumping going on, and drivers were being incentivised and having some sizable sweeteners for going elsewhere. So even if operators think they've got a new recruit, literally the night before they're due to start, it's been, I'm pulling out because I'm going to another company, they've offered me more money. So it's a difficult one. And hopefully, it's a little bit like the fuel. Hopefully the issue has peaked, and that we'll start to see things being addressed.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chairman. A comment really to start off with. The theme of today seems to be a shortage of drivers. This ain't just happened overnight, but I'm glad to see the last comments about growing our own. Look forward to hearing that all drivers have been trained at, with our organisation. But the question is, on 1.1, what exactly is the credit agreement? Thank you.
Okay, when we set the company up, we were very clear that we didn't want the company to potentially be a financial burden, but we also needed to make sure that we didn't infringe state aid rules if the company was going to operate as a transport company out in the market, which is what it does. We therefore couldn't just give the company money, so we lent the company basically two types of loan. One which was a capital loan as such to buy its assets, to buy its vehicles, etc. And the other one is called a revolving credit. And it's, if you imagine your overdraft, your bank overdraft, it's a similar arrangement to that, whereby they can draw down that money. They pay interest on all of the loan activity, whether it's revolving credit or the fixed capital loan, and they do that at commercial rates, a percentage above base rate. Okay.
Thank you. So thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. I move that we note the report and request that our comments from the debate are taken under consideration and shared with the Executive Member for Highways, Transport and IT. Does anyone dissent? No? That's great. So the the final item on the agenda, the committee work programme. This item is on pages 101 to 105 of the agenda pack. This item enables the committee to comment on the content of its work programme. The report will be presented by Chiara, our scrutiny officer. The actions the committee is invited to review the work programme and highlight any additional scrutiny activity which could be included for consideration in the work programme. Over to you, Chiara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just to remind you that the work programme is being reviewed at each and every single meeting of this committee to make sure that the contents of the work programme are still relevant and will add value to the work of the Council and partners. I'm pleased to confirm that since the issuing of this agenda, we have had no further changes on the work programme. Thank you.
Thank you. Would any members of the committee like to comment on this item? No. Okay, so I move that we note the report and approve the existing work programme as detailed in the pages 101 to 105. Yeah. Does anyone dissent? No. That's great. So, yeah. So that now concludes the business of the meeting. Thank you everyone for your attendance and your values efforts during the first half of this year of the new council term. may I take this opportunity to wish you and your families a very Merry Christmas and a healthy, festive season and New Year. Thank you.